No, but I mean, I'll be over there. I'll be over there.
Patroller, an Avalanche forecaster,
Is there a way I cannot wear this?
Safety director at Big Sky Resort before joining the Sawtooth Avalanche
Okay.
staff in 2012. His past ISSW presentations include deep slab forecasting, post-control
And I won't
releases,
be in the screen because I will be
professional
all
near
over the
misses,
place.
shallow burials, worker safety, and mixed rain
If
on
I-
snow avalanches.
I may just pull it
Scott
off
is a
if I
National
break
Avalanche
it.
School instructor, president of Avalanche Worker Safety, and he knows a little bit about a lot of different things and generally considers each day that he learns more than he forgets to be a success. So here we go, Scott Savage. Thank you so much for traveling up here.
Awesome. What am I on? Good deal. Well, hey, thanks a ton for having me here. I'm all mic'd up and I like to move around, so hopefully I don't pull the camera over while I'm going. We'll have a quick break if I do. So a couple things I want to get up front. One, this is audience participation involved, so you will be asked to do something, not just sit on your hands. And we're going to keep it lively here in the morning. Make sure everyone's awake. Probably be forewarned to those of you that I know. That guy in the back there, Sully, I'll be calling on him for sure at some point today. And the other thing, if you do have a pencil or pen and some paper, keep it handy. There'll be a part where, ideally, if you have something to write with, that'll be it'll drive home a point a little bit better. So we'll get going. This whole project kind of started it was 2009 or 10. I was working on a professional near-miss project with Ron Simonhoist, guy who used to be down in Juneau. A lot of you probably know Ron. And we were looking at near misses and trying to figure out, mistakes that professionals make. And there was one event in Big Sky where I worked there for about 20 years that was a great example of a, really interesting near miss, but we didn't have any formal data on it really. I mean, a lot of stuff happened at this point in time. On Christmas Day in 1996, a patroller was killed in an explosives accident. A lot of you who were working back then probably remember that. And it was a big storm cycle, 2 to 3 feet of new snow fell that day, and then huge winds. The next day we came back in to do mitigation work. Routes had been suspended the day before with the fatality. So, a really big day as far as new snow loads. And I was up there that day. There were 2 routes that were working in, fairly close proximity and maybe 800 feet apart in near the top of the mountain. So I was a part of the first team. We went out, and there's a snow fence there that you can tie into and throw a few shots to kind of tenderize things. I mean, visibility is like 5 to 50 feet, just pea soup, blowing 60. You guys have all, the conditions I'm talking about, just ugly, you can't see jack. So throw those 3 shots, nothing happens. And then I move over to a safe rock rib down a little bit and didn't see any results with that. So I'm in a good spot. My route partner goes down and he gets a little bit lower than I do and throws a shot, and he's in a pretty good spot. He ended up being fine. Triggers this massive avalanche. It's 2 meter plus crown, about 1,200 feet across. And I had a great view. I'm like 10 feet away from it in the rocks in a safe spot, and see this thing open up, and you feel that guttural. It was the first really big slide I'd been right next to, so you feel it in your stomach. It sounds like a train going by, these big ones. And then it's just rocks and facets just tinkling down the slope. Couldn't see what had happened below. I remember saying, there goes Lennon, big slide. Another guy, the patrol director, Bob Dixon, who's over on a different ridge, he says that shack's gone. So there's a lift down at the bottom. The lift shack used to be right there, nice log building. So that's a couple thousand vert down below where it was. So it just blew that thing, threw it into the shivs, and carried it all downhill. Everyone's scrambling, trying to make sure there wasn't anyone down there in that area. There wasn't supposed to be, but just double checking. And then we hear on the radio, hey, Lennon low, this is Lennon high, we're okay. And it hadn't even crossed our minds. It's like, what do you mean you're okay? Where were you? So turns out we, in 2010, so 14 years later, the 4 people that were up there, we all wrote down what we remembered from what happened that morning. And those 2 had, one of the 2 people had gone out, and he was kind of looking around, and he heard the shot get called in, the fire in the hole, and was trying to get back to the ridge, was a few steps from getting there, didn't get there. His route partner had gone out like 2 steps off of the rocks where he was on a kind of roll or cornice. So both of them had it break, like right at their feet, fell about 10 feet onto a 50-degree sheet of ice. The one guy, his ski went in, he describes it as boing. It was just like the coyote and the roadrunner, where all of a sudden he's got his ski sticking in and he didn't go anywhere. The other guy was able to self-arrest, but almost had 2 fatalities that, the day after we had one. Really close call. So in looking through our accounts of that, there are a lot of similarities. So a lot of things were, very similar or exactly the same in our descriptions of our recollection of the events. But then one of them, there was a huge difference. So one of the 2 people that was, almost caught and almost went down in this, he remembered going up that morning and shooting 12 to 15 Avalanche rounds with a female patroller, blind firing in the dark at that path, or at those paths that came down. And I talked to the other guy who's now the snow safety director who was up there. It's like, do you remember this? He's like, nah, it didn't happen, Chief. I don't think so. And we talked to each other, and the timing didn't make sense because this person was at the morning meeting. And remember him talking, just there wasn't time to go do that. We talked to, there were only 3 female patrollers then. There weren't it wasn't a huge ski patrol. I'm married to one of them, so I asked her. She's like, no, I wasn't even working that day. Talked to the other 2. They had no recollection of it. They're like, one of them said, no, I've never shot that gun in my life, and the other one didn't shoot it. And then we went back and looked at the logs, at the explosive logs, and it didn't happen. So at this point, like, all right, got this person who I have a ton of respect for, a really solid Avalanche professional, and now I'm thinking either 1, they're a crazy person, 2, they're a liar, or 3, something else is going on. And that's what piqued my interest in this, to look into memory, how it works, how it can fail, and some implications for us as Avalanche professionals. So how does memory work? Maybe it is just, like putting the chip into your head. What do you think? What goes in is what comes out. If only it were that simple and we remembered everything. You hear about this, people having photographic memories, but it's not quite that simple. So we're going to focus on this part right here. No, we're not. I wouldn't do that to you. That's brutal. This is a lot simpler. So this is based on a model a guy named Arthur Melton came up with in the 60s. Obviously a huge oversimplification. I mean, there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of people that have spent their entire careers working on some little part of it. So the only thing I really want to hit here is that we're bombarded with environmental input, what you see, hear, feel, taste, smell. And that gets stored in a matter of milliseconds. You don't know what's happening in what we call our sensory memory. Then things either get into our working memory or short-term memory, or they don't. That's, think, on a matter of seconds. And then things can either get moved into our long-term memory by encoding them, and it goes back and forth, moving from our working memory into long-term memory. And that's more, seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, years. So that's just the general time frame that we're looking at. So the first thing we'll look at here in a couple different ways is how things move. So what you're seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling right now, whether that gets stored or not. Something called encoding. So you're just bombarded with stimuli. I mean, right now there's so much going on around us. It doesn't seem to be that much, but thousands, millions probably, little pieces of input. And in our brains, we have a little tiny biochemical trace of every piece of that sensory stimuli that comes in. But we don't actually remember or learn these things, so we don't perceive that they're happening. Something has to happen so we can actually perceive and have a memory, so to speak, of these little biochemical traces. So if you have seen the video that I'm going to show, then don't spoil the answer if you already know what it is beforehand. If you haven't, we'll just follow the instructions here.
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball.
All right, so who got 16 for the number of passes? Come on, raise your hands. I want to be able to see. All right, pretty good. Who had a number other than 16? So a little more than half, it looks like, got that part. Who saw the gorilla walk across the screen? Who didn't see the gorilla walk across the screen? I know the first time I saw it, I didn't see it. Who saw the player from the black team walk away and just quit in the middle of it? Who didn't see that? Who saw the curtains change colors in the middle of it? Who didn't see that? So, just so you believe me that it actually happened.
Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events.
So this encoding, storing things in our working memory, it's a really selective process. We're going to see what we're focused on and what we expect to see. And that really gives adage to the old mantra that look for instability, right? If you're looking for instability, you're going to actually have a better chance of finding instability compared to if you're looking for stable snow. It's because you're going to see what you expect to see. You're going to see what you're focused on. It's kind of we have to have this, otherwise we'd just be walking around aimlessly not knowing what to look at and wouldn't learn anything. So we have to have that focus, but this selectiveness is kind of a byproduct of the way that our brains are wired. A couple points on this are some people just better noticers than other people? And it seems that research shows that no, it's not correlated to general intelligence, IQ, or your tracking ability. So people just aren't generally better at being able to notice things and move things, to be able to perceive what's going on around them. But there is one group that we'll see, in general, about 50% of the people who haven't seen the video won't see that gorilla. It's, a lot of people have done that experiment over the years. But there is one group that does see it at a higher rate. What do you think that is? So in this particular video. Gorillas, that'd be a good one. No, it turns out that very highly skilled expert basketball players will see the gorilla at a higher rate. So if you're doing something in your area of expertise, it doesn't require as much of that mental brain power to be able to count passes. Soccer players or hockey players, they won't see the gorilla at a higher rate, but basketball players would. And you'd probably see the same thing. A good example would be like if Sully or some great expert snow machine rider was outside hilling, they're going to be able to see what's going on around them a lot better than if some hack like me who's worried about falling over is going to be able to see something happening. Conversely, people who've been out digging in the snow forever, so, Dave Hamry, he was doing it when there was black and white TV. He was out there poking around in the snow. So he's going to see things that someone who's been doing it for 2 or 3 years isn't, because he doesn't have to devote that brain power to the task at hand, and it's just, that's his area of expertise. Make sense? We good still? Yeah. Sorry about that. So the next experiment here, we're going to try to remember, don't write them down, but try to remember as many of these words as you can. Frozen, angular, striated, brittle, sugary, persistent, dangerous, unpredictable, 3 millimeters, temperature, diffusion, crystal, weak, radiant, and large. So try to remember as many of those as you can. And this is a guy named James Deese did this experiment back in the 60s. He came up with it. It's been repeated in a variety of different ways a lot in the psychological community. So another experiment, in a really seminal paper, a guy named George Miller back in the 50s wrote a paper called The Magic Number 7, plus or minus 2. And it turns out that our working or short-term memory, we can store roughly 7 pieces of information, plus or minus 2, before something happens. And at that point, not only do we not remember what we're seeing as well, we tend to forget what's already in there, things get moved. So we have a limited capacity in that working memory of what we can remember. And it does vary a little bit by individual for sure. You know, some people are better rememberers than others. Just one example of that, how we've taken that to heart is phone numbers. You know, before you had area codes, before there were that many people, they purposefully kept phone numbers at 7 digits because people could actually remember them. Now you can't. When they're 10 digits, you know, it gets brutal. Same thing with license plates. That's why license plates are about that length, because people might actually be able to see it and remember it. So, at this point, I want everyone to write down, or if you don't have something to write with, write down or at least recall as many of those words as you can. All right, how are we doing? Has everyone written down as many as they can remember? We don't need to hear that again. Okay, who wrote down striated? Who got that one? So pretty good, and that was one of the first words, so something called the primacy effect. You tend to remember the first things in a string that you see or hear. How about gradient? Who got that one? And that one's something called the recency effect. So that was one of the last words, so people tend to remember those, you know, or be able to recall them fairly well also. How about unpredictable? So a few were there, not a huge difference, but not that many people, and not that many people were raising your hands. Who's not playing this game? That one's a little tougher. It's in the middle, so that's the magic number 7 at work right there. But those are the things that you're going to have a higher percentage of will get pushed out or moved out of that working memory. And then facet. Who had that one? So about like unpredictable. So let's look at the list now. So there's striated, which had a fair amount of recall. There's gradient. There's unpredictable, we had less. Wait, where's facet? Uh-oh. Got a problem. So that's what researchers have termed a false recall. And it is a really big problem. On average, in the original experiments that he did, close to 50% of the people would have a false recall and see the word and write down the word that they think they saw or think they heard. And of those people who wrote it down, about half of them are absolutely convinced. They're like, no, I know that I heard that. I know I saw it. You're lying to me. So it's really powerful. Why does it happen? It's, you know, our memory isn't just that photographic image of what we see or what we hear. It's going to be based on our experiences, our knowledge, our attitudes, our beliefs, our pattern recognition. So we're going to fill in the blanks. So that's where that false recall comes from. A couple problems with that, a couple, you know, big problems. That one, we can't discern that alteration or that false recall in our memory. It's the same as the words that we actually did see. It doesn't look different or feel different. We just know that we remembered it. And two, this happens way more than you think it does. I mean, if it happened here today, how many times do you think it happens in everyday life? So we don't get feedback on that we're remembering things that didn't actually happen. So it can be a really big problem, obviously. So now we'll move over a little bit, switch gears to how do we get things from our working memory, which is that, you know, roughly 7 things we can keep in there, in and out of our long-term memory, which we can remember for, you know, days, weeks, months, years. So there are 2 processes, you know, storage and retrieval, and storage is pretty easy. We have an amazing ability to store information. It's the retrieval that's harder, that it gets a lot more difficult on the retrieving? I mean, who's had that thing you're trying to remember and it's on the tip of your tongue? But if you were to see a multiple choice list of what that thing that's on the tip of your tongue is, it'd be super easy to remember. You remember it really clearly. So that highlights how that retrieval process is a lot more difficult. One specific kind of long-term memory, something that some researchers, Brown and Kulik, back in the 70s, coined the term flashbulb memory. And flashbulb memories are things that have a really high, amount of emotion, and you remember them like it was yesterday. It's incredibly vivid with rich detail. So a great example is, where were you and what were you doing when you heard about 9/11? Who remembers what they were doing that day? Who remembers what they had for breakfast the day after? That's flashbulb memory. So you have these strong associations that allow you, theoretically, to remember things, really, really well. They started doing some research on this with initially the first shuttle tragedy or disaster. I think it was the Challenger back in the 80s. So if you're around, my age, 50-ish, you probably were in junior high or high school. I remember I was sitting in a cafeteria when that one happened. And then they continued that with 9/11 too. What the researchers would do in general is have people recount what they were doing, who they were with, everything they remember about that, and then record that. Also ask people, how confident are you in what happened, that this is accurate and the truth. And then they would repeat that over weeks, months, and in some experiments even years later. So they would track how memories either stayed the same or changed, and what people's confidence was in those memories, those recollections of these really powerful events in their lives. It gets pretty spooky with this too, that the results are not what you would hope for. Things change dramatically, that it's a really fluid, dynamic process. You tend to incorporate other people's memories into yours. Things just, they change and they'll get really wavy gravy. So while the memory changes dramatically, that Big Sky example that's what happened. It's a great example of this really powerful, emotional, vivid memory that we have this really high amount of confidence in because it's so vivid and it's so rich in details. The problem is that confidence and that vividness and richness doesn't mean that it's more accurate. So people's confidence stayed the same, or even in some cases they became even more confident. They were like, I can remember it like it happened yesterday. I just remember it. But it'd be completely different. They look at researchers or look at subjects, and I can't remember the research group, I should, but they did this experiment on themselves, so on the psychology department. And they were, with people who they weren't with, they were in different cities. Things have changed dramatically to the point where they're like, I don't believe it, man, I want to see it. And they look at videos of themselves describing, what had happened. So a really interesting thing that just because it's incredibly vivid and you have that great recall, that doesn't mean you have great accuracy in what's going on. So what? Why does this matter? Our ultimate goal or goals here are, one, hopefully we'll figure out a few tricks to remember more things and more accurately, and two, know when to not trust them or when we should be warming up for Dave's dance. Know when we shouldn't trust them and what can we do about it? What are some tricks we can use to avoid getting in trouble? So unfortunately here, so if you can't read it, if you're on the sides, I was unfaithful to you once to some redhead in the men's room of a pool hall in 1971. I was drunk. And his wife says, that was me. So things do get worse with age. Many people in this room here to attest, you lose your keys more often. You need multiple choice in life more than being able to recall things. It won't get better, it'll get worse. And the problem is that retrieval, that's the bottleneck. So, you have a lot more of those, it's on the tip of my tongue kind of events. What are some solutions to that, potentially? Well, one, take photos of anything really significant, because you won't remember it as well as you think. This is a classic slide at Big Sky that I remember for a couple reasons. One, it was a pretty large one. Those are people up there. So again, it's a 2.5 meter crown. And the patroller who triggered it was kind of standing in a little cave in this rock rib when he threw the shot out there. There's a lot of snow above him. That could have been really spooky, so we called it Malcolm slide, just because the person's last name was Malcolm, Scott Malcolm, who triggered that thing. And I'll always remember it as Malcolm slide. That association really helps by having something there. So one, take pictures whenever you can, document it, anything. So if you're worried about safe zones for a particular piece of terrain you're dealing with, or just what's impacted with certain size slides, you're not going to remember it as well as you think you will. Photos are huge. And then any kind of association you can make if you're trying to remember something. So maybe you're out digging a pit and you're like, God, I really need to remember this, and I don't have my pit book, or I don't have anything to write with me. Then come up with some association. Maybe your feet are really cold, or maybe you have to pee really bad. That's probably a great one. So pee in the side of the pit. Who doesn't mark their pits anyhow, right? We all do that. But yeah, and then you'll remember it as the pee pit, and it'll help you to remember those details. Just having that weird association, it helps you recall things. So associations, we don't remember isolated facts, we remember things in context. Vividness does not equal accuracy. This is hugely important. It's counterintuitive, but like that flashbulb memory, kind of all that research shows, and that Big Sky event, that just because there's incredibly rich detail and you remember it like it was yesterday, you think, oh, I can just see the picture of where I was now. Like what you remember about where you were at 9/11 probably isn't entirely correct. It's hard to picture because it's like, I know it was, I know where I was, but it's probably not. So just be really leery of that if someone's giving you all these incredibly rich details and telling you exactly what's going on 20 years ago or 2 years ago, you need to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. A good example of that is there's been a lot of murder convictions overturned in the last, since the birth of modern genetics. And in the vast majority of the cases, I think it's around 75% of the convictions that are overturned, they're based on really credible, really vivid, really detailed first-hand witness accounts. That was why people went to jail for things that they're proved with genetics and DNA analysis that they didn't do. So it can be really powerful, but it's not accurate all the time. It's not any more accurate, actually, than the things that are, seemingly inconsequential. You're going to have the same amount of slop in the system. And then confidence does not equal competence and accuracy. Confidence is a general trait. It's not, generally confident people, whether maybe they're really confident about their ability to ski or snowmobile, they're also going to be really confident about their ability to pick stocks and about their ability to remember things. So it's not, tailored to your particular skill or your area of expertise. Like, what was it, Prairie Home Companion, Garrison Keillor. The women are strong, their men are good looking, and the children are all above average, right? So overconfidence is very real. The latest data that I saw when they studied what percentage of people consider themselves to have above average intelligence, in the United States, it's 63% of the population is of above average intelligence. And if you can break it down, it's 57% of females, which isn't that bad, it's pretty close. But us dumbass men, it's 71%. Now, do we have any Canadians here? They're worse, it's 70% instead of 63% for Canadians, unfortunately. So there's obviously some cultural things in there too. But that overconfidence is real, and the Dunning-Kruger effect, the worse someone is at something, the more overconfident you are. Which is really deadly for people who are just getting into the Avalanche game. Like if you look at recreationists who know nothing, they're going to have the biggest gap between their perceived skill or their confidence and their actual ability level. As you get better and better at something, that gap narrows. So you become more accurate at predicting your own skill level. But you still, in general, people are overconfident. An interesting experiment that some folks did, and I can't remember the names, I can look it up if anyone's curious, because it is an interesting paper to read. They're looking at some school-age kids, I can't remember if it was junior high or high school, but looking at their ability to do math problems in groups. So they got into relatively small groups, 3 or 4 people, and they let everyone do a few practice problems so they can kind of get the hang of their group and figure out, get to know each other, who's good at math, who isn't, how should we approach this, solving problems. And they had a rating for each person based on standardized tests, so they knew going in how good everyone was at doing these problems. And then when it came time to do the actual tests, they would, solve the math problem, and they would break out into groups, and then they want to know, okay, how did you decide what the answer was? What was your approach? What did you do? And what do you think? I mean, intuitively, you would think that they would put the most weight on whoever is the best at math on what they had to say and go with that answer, right? That's not what happened at all. It turns out 94% of the answers, they went with whoever spoke first. That was the answer they went with. So, and that's kind of confidence, dominance, being an extrovert, but it's not skill, it's not competence, it's not accuracy. And really, if you think about it, that's kind of one of the root causes of problems in group dynamics and the expert halo. Okay, whoever speaks up first, which has nothing to do with how competent they are most of the time. It's just strictly dominance, extroversion, and confidence. People are going to tend to give that more weight than whatever comes next, whatever explanation, logic, reasoning. So kind of spooky. Beware of the person who's like, I am 100% sure this slope is good to ski, especially if they haven't been out and playing that game very much. So the X-Files, I'm sure a lot of you remember the phrase, was trust no one, question everything. I wouldn't necessarily say that, but a healthy dose of skepticism, realism, and conservatism, especially when you're doing something that's potentially dangerous and is based on memories, whether it's your own or someone else's. You really need to think about that, because it's not infallible. Our memories at all, they're changing, they're fluid, we have false recall, there are a lot of potential issues going on. It's still, obviously it's valuable, that's what your experience is memory, but we need to be careful about putting too much weight on that. And one way that we can do that when we're thinking about that $1 million question, should I ski it, should I ride it, should I do it, whatever it is, should I ski up this slope? A way that we can just build a little bit of margin, safety margin in there, the answer is one of two things. It's either hell yes or no. If it's, I think that's no. If it's, yeah, it should be okay, I remember one time when, that's no. And it comes from Derek Seaver's guy who started CD Baby. He bases a lot of his business decisions on this, but it's something I've been playing with for a few years when I'm out in the field. And it does just build a little bit of a cushion into your decision making when you're out there in the field. So I encourage people to try that, play with it. And it really makes you think about those times when you're on the gray area. And for me, it really made me think, how many things have I gotten away with in the past? Whereas like, yeah, I think it'll be okay. And you do it, and you got away with it. But, was that a good thing to be doing? But we don't know, feedback's so poor. So with that, I'll say thanks a ton, and see if anyone has any questions. Is there time? Nothing? Yeah?
So knowing what we know about false recall and sort of poor eyewitness accounts, how do you deal with that as Avalanche forecaster? You're interviewing a party in the wake of an avalanche accident and a fatality where the details could matter. There was some real pointed details, and something in the back of your mind is saying, well, maybe this detail doesn't make sense, or there's countering ideas of that specific detail. How do you capture that in an accident investigation?
It is really tough. In an accident that I investigated, I'll talk about this afternoon, kind of had that. I was on the scene while it was kind of playing out, and we weren't sure, even after we'd been there for 10 minutes, whether there were 3, 4, or 5 people involved. So, those details, which are really big details, you just have to take everything with a grain of salt and try to corroborate things with as many people as you can. When we're writing things, I know since I started looking into this, I definitely couch things more, what's reported as, not, the burial depth was 2 feet. They don't know what the burial depth was, burial depth was reported to be 2 feet. You have to use qualifiers like that, and you have to think about, as the information's coming into you in the heat of the moment, which is when it really matters if you're trying to save someone, that, try to back it up. Because the odds of 2 people having the exact same false recall or, unrealistic or inaccurate memory goes down. The same thing as if you're taking bits. It'd take more than one if you're doing a stability test. Chances of having false results. If you do 2, you dramatically decrease the odds. So that's really all I can say. But yeah, you see it understand it a lot. Good question. Yeah, Scott.
Hey, Scott. Yeah, I thought that was excellent on confidence, and especially on your sharp razor divide between hell yes and no. There is no maybe if you want to live a long life. That's a concept that we've talked for a long time. Yes, no, and maybe. All the maybes need to turn into no's if you want to stick in the game. And I might add that there's some hope in it that over time with more experience, you're able to change more of the maybes into solid yeses or no's. The reason why now with more knowledge and experience, you know that maybe is actually a yes. You can open up some opportunities.
Yeah, no, great point. For those of you that couldn't hear, Scott was stressing that LAS could definitely stress that there is no maybe, that maybe is no. And ideally over time that more of those maybes, become either yeses or nos. And experience does help you sort things better into the no or hell yes. Yeah, great comment. Yeah.
This is less about the memory, but more as you were talking about cognitive bias and other biases. What about anything? Do you have anything to add about gender biases, or is there anything to look out for? Because I know there's got to be something that adds to the dynamics of communication and writing and who's in charge and team dynamics and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a really good question, but way too big for me. I think talk to me later. I can give you some good books to start with as an intro, and then you just really need to dive into these rabbit holes of what you're really interested in. But it's such a huge topic. Cognition and bias is incredibly real, and there's some great work out there, but it's hard to do that. Yeah, definitely find me at one of the breaks. I mean, 2 of my favorite books are Mistakes Were Made But Not By Me. If you haven't read that, read it. It's a great thing about how we justify decisions. I have a list. Come find me, but start by reading that one.
Okay.
Everyone should read that book and be like, wow, that's me. Wow, that's so-and-so. All throughout it. Great book.
Thank you.
Yeah. Wendy?
I just had a quick question about, I was curious if the controller that had a false recall in your Big Sky story, how he recognized that now, or how he feels about that?
Yeah, it still is in the process of being worked out. He accepts the fact, but it's interesting. I meant to talk to him again before this because he knows that I've been doing these, and I think it's hard. I think there's a similar issue that Bruce Tremper had with something that he had a long-standing false recall, and I didn't get a chance to talk to Bruce about it. I wanted to, but it was something that was on his mind. It's like, I can't believe that wasn't true. So yeah, I don't have better information on it. I wish I did. I need to do that. I need to, be on the phone for an hour and a half with him or go visit him to find out what he thinks about it now. All right. Well, it's like time to hand it back to Olaf and find me at the break and get questions.
Thanks so much, Scotty. We are now on to our first break of the day. It's a morning coffee break, and the coffee is by Pilati Brothers, and there's goodies by Fire Island. All the food is downstairs. Please be back up here by 10:30. We're going to start off promptly at 10:30.